It was a bright Sunday afternoon in spring when Sarah Thompson pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Park. The 32-year-old pediatric nurse checked her watch. 2:30 p.m., the perfect time for their weekend park routine. The playground would be less crowded now, which was exactly what she wanted for Emma's first park visit. 6-year-old Emma sat quietly in the back seat, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. It had been only 2 weeks since she had come into Sarah's care through the foster system. The little girl, with her blonde curls and bright blue eyes, was still adjusting to her new life, and Sarah was doing everything possible to make the transition smoother. "Ready for some fun, Emma?" Sarah asked, looking at the child through the rearview mirror. Emma nodded shyly, her small fingers tightening around her rabbit's ears. Sarah had learned that Emma spoke very little, which was understandable given her difficult past. Sarah stepped out of her blue Honda Civic, her dark braids swaying in the spring breeze. She smoothed down her simple green t-shirt and jeans before opening the back door to help Emma out. The little girl carefully climbed down, holding Sarah's hand tightly. "Look, they have swings," Sarah pointed enthusiastically. "Would you like to try them?" Emma's eyes lit up at the sight of the empty swing set, and she nodded more eagerly this time. As they walked toward the playground, Sarah noticed a few other families scattered around. 2 boys were playing basketball on the nearby court. A couple of toddlers were in the sandbox with their dad, and some older kids were riding bikes along the paved paths. Sarah helped Emma onto the swing, making sure she was secured properly. "Hold on tight to the chains, sweetie. I'll push you gently at first." Emma's small hands gripped the metal chains, and a tiny smile appeared on her face as Sarah began to push. With each gentle push, Emma's confidence grew. After a few minutes, Sarah heard something that made her heart swell: a giggle. It was the first time she had heard Emma laugh since her arrival. Quickly, she pulled out her phone to document the moment. As a foster parent, she was required to keep records of Emma's progress, and this was definitely a milestone worth recording. "Higher, please," Emma whispered, and Sarah happily obliged, pushing a little harder. The little girl's giggles grew louder, her blonde curls bouncing in the sunlight. Several parents nearby smiled at the heartwarming scene. Sarah remembered her first meeting with Emma at the foster care office. The child had been through 3 foster homes in the past year, and her caseworker, Ms. Rodriguez, had been desperate to find a stable placement. Sarah, who had been a foster parent for 3 years, knew she could provide the loving home Emma needed. As Emma swung back and forth, Sarah noticed her starting to relax more. Her shoulders weren't as tense, and her smile was growing wider. These were the moments Sarah lived for, seeing a child slowly opening up and feeling safe. "Would you like to try the slide next?" Sarah asked after a while, noticing Emma's enthusiasm for the playground growing. Emma nodded vigorously, and Sarah helped her slow the swing down. As they walked hand in hand toward the slide, Sarah pulled out some hand sanitizer from her bag and cleaned Emma's hands. "Safety first," she said with a warm smile, something she was used to saying both as a nurse and a foster mom. Emma climbed the ladder carefully while Sarah stood nearby, ready to catch her if needed. The little girl sat at the top of the slide, looking slightly nervous. "It's okay, sweetie. I'm right here," Sarah reassured her. Emma took a deep breath and pushed herself forward, her face breaking into a huge smile as she slid down. Again, Emma exclaimed as she reached the bottom, the most animated Sarah had seen her yet. Sarah's heart filled with joy at this breakthrough. She quickly took another photo, capturing Emma's excited expression. What Sarah didn't notice as she helped Emma back to the ladder was the woman watching them from a nearby bench. The woman's eyes narrowed as she observed the black woman with the white child, her fingers already reaching for her phone. The peaceful afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn, but for now, Sarah and Emma continued their playground adventure, lost in their own world of newfound trust and happiness. Karen Mitchell had been watching Sarah and Emma for 15 minutes from her bench, her face growing increasingly sour. The 45-year-old woman, dressed in expensive yoga clothes and oversized sunglasses, considered herself the unofficial guardian of Riverside Park. Her house overlooked the playground, and she took pride in keeping the neighborhood safe. Today, something didn't sit right with her. She kept staring at Sarah's dark skin and then at Emma's pale complexion and blonde hair. In Karen's narrow mind, they didn't match. She pulled out her iPhone 15 Pro Max and started recording secretly, muttering to herself about suspicious activity. Sarah was completely unaware of the brewing storm. She was helping Emma build a sandcastle in the sandbox, showing her how to pack the sand tightly into the plastic molds they brought. Emma was giggling as she decorated their creation with small twigs and leaves. "Excuse me," a sharp voice cut through their peaceful moment. Sarah looked up to see a woman with highlighted blonde hair and a pinched expression standing over them, phone pointed directly at their faces. "What exactly do you think you're doing with that child?" Sarah felt Emma instantly tense beside her. The little girl pressed herself against Sarah's side, trembling slightly. Sarah wrapped a protective arm around Emma's shoulders. "We're just enjoying the park," Sarah replied calmly, her nurse's training kicking in. She was used to dealing with difficult people. "I'm Emma's foster mother." Karen's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. "Oh, really?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Do you have any proof of that? Because from where I'm standing, this looks very suspicious." She emphasized the last word, continuing to film them. Several parents nearby started paying attention to the scene. Sarah noticed a couple of them pulling out their phones, but they weren't filming her. They were recording Karen. "Ma'am, you're frightening Emma," Sarah said firmly, noticing how the little girl was now hiding her face. "I have all proper documentation, but I'm not obligated to show it to random strangers in the park." Karen's face turned red. "I am not a random stranger. I live right there." She pointed dramatically to a large house overlooking the park. "And I've been watching you taking pictures of this child. Very suspicious behavior." "I document Emma's activities for her case file," Sarah explained patiently, though her heart was racing. "It's actually required by the foster care system." But Karen wasn't listening. She was now pacing back and forth, her voice getting louder. "A likely story. I've never seen you in this neighborhood before. This is a safe community, and we look out for our children here." The emphasis on "our" wasn't lost on Sarah. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, one she'd experienced many times before as a black woman in predominantly white spaces. But her main concern was Emma, who was now quietly crying. "It's okay, sweetie," Sarah whispered to Emma, rubbing her back gently. "Everything's going to be fine. Don't talk to her." Karen snapped. "I'm calling the police right now. We'll see what they have to say about this situation." Sarah pulled out her phone with her free hand, her fingers steady despite the situation. She quickly typed a message to Ms. Rodriguez, Emma's social worker, at Riverside Park. "Woman threatening to call police. Need backup with documentation." The response was immediate. "On my way. Stay calm. Police liaison informed." Other parents were now moving closer. A young mother with 2 kids approached Sarah. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" she asked quietly. Sarah nodded gratefully, appreciating the show of support. But Karen was already on her phone, her voice rising hysterically. "Yes, police? I'm at Riverside Park, and there's a suspicious woman here with a white child." "Yes, the woman is African American." She said the last part like it was evidence of a crime. "She claims to be a foster mother, but I don't believe it. She's been taking pictures of the child." "Yes, please hurry." Sarah took a deep breath and pulled out her foster parent ID card, keeping it ready. She'd been through cultural competency training and knew this might happen someday, but the reality was still painful. She looked down at Emma, who had stopped crying but was still shaking. "Would you like to show Karen your rabbit?" Sarah asked softly, trying to maintain normalcy for Emma's sake. The little girl shook her head, clutching her stuffed animal tighter. In the distance, police sirens began to wail. Karen stood triumphantly, still recording. She had no idea how badly her afternoon was about to backfire. The police sirens grew louder, and Sarah could feel her heart pounding. But years of working in emergency rooms had taught her to stay calm during crisis situations. She needed to be strong for Emma, who was still pressed against her side, small fingers gripping her shirt. "Emma, sweetheart." Sarah spoke softly. "Some police officers are going to come talk to us. They're here to help, okay? Just like we saw in your favorite cartoon about community helpers, remember?" Karen was pacing back and forth, still recording everything on her phone. "The police will sort this out," she announced loudly, looking around at the growing crowd of onlookers. "We'll see who's telling the truth." 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing. Sarah noticed Emma's eyes grow wide with fear. It's okay, honey. Look at your bunny. What should we name him? We never gave him a proper name, did we? This simple distraction worked. Emma looked down at her stuffed rabbit, momentarily forgetting the chaos around them. Charlie, she whispered, surprising Sarah with her clear voice. Charlie, that's a wonderful name. Sarah smiled, continuing to rub Emma's back soothingly. Two police officers approached their group, one male and one female. Officer Jenkins, the female officer, immediately recognized Sarah from the children's hospital. Officer Jenkins and Officer Martinez moved Karen away from the playground to have a serious conversation. Karen's confident attitude had completely disappeared, replaced by nervous fidgeting as she realized how badly she had misread the situation. Meanwhile, Sarah pushed Emma on the swings, trying to return some normalcy to their afternoon. Ms. Rodriguez stood nearby, watching with a satisfied smile as Emma's giggles returned. The social worker had known Sarah for 3 years and had placed 4 other children with her before Emma. All of them had thrived under Sarah's care. Higher, Emma called out, her earlier fear forgotten in the joy of swinging. Several other kids had returned to the playground, the tension in the air finally breaking. Near the park entrance, the conversation between Karen and the police officers was becoming intense. Officer Jenkins was reviewing the law about false police reports, while Officer Martinez examined Karen's phone. Mrs. Mitchell, Officer Jenkins said firmly, "Do you understand that what you did today could be considered harassment? Not only did you make false assumptions, but you also recorded a minor without parental consent." Karen's designer sunglasses were now pushed up on her head, her face pale. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood," she stammered. "You hear so many stories these days." "Stories?" Officer Martinez cut in. "You mean like the story of how Sarah Thompson received an award last year for her work with children in the emergency room, or the story of how she's helped 20 foster children over the past 3 years?" Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. A small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, many of them parents who regularly visited the park. Among them was Mrs. Chen, whose son had been Sarah's patient during a severe asthma attack last winter. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "Officers, if I may, Sarah saved my son David's life 6 months ago. She stayed past her shift to make sure he was breathing properly." She turned to Karen with disapproval, and he tried to have her arrested for taking her foster daughter to the park. More parents began sharing their stories. Mr. Johnson talked about how Sarah had calmed his daughter during a broken arm treatment. Mrs. Patel mentioned how Sarah had helped her twins during their vaccination appointments, making the experience less scary with her gentle approach. Officer Jenkins took out her notebook. "Mrs. Mitchell, let's review what happened here. You saw a licensed foster parent, who is also a respected pediatric nurse, taking her foster daughter to the park. Instead of approaching them politely, you immediately assumed the worst because of..." She paused, letting Karen fill in the blank. Karen shifted uncomfortably, knowing exactly why she had made her assumptions. Back at the swings, Emma was ready to try something new. "Can we go to the monkey bars?" she asked Sarah, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "Of course, sweetie. But first, let's thank Ms. Rodriguez for coming to help us." Sarah led Emma over to her social worker, who beamed at the child's increasing confidence. "Thank you," Emma said softly to Ms. Rodriguez, still holding Charlie the bunny tight. Ms. Rodriguez knelt down to Emma's level. "You were very brave today, Emma, and Sarah took such good care of you, didn't she?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "She makes me feel safe," she said, surprising both women with her clear statement. It was the longest sentence they had heard from her yet. Officer Jenkins approached them, leaving her partner to finish up with Karen. "Sarah, we're going to need a statement from you, but it can wait until tomorrow. Why don't you and Emma enjoy the rest of your afternoon?" "What's going to happen to Mrs. Mitchell?" Sarah asked quietly, making sure Emma couldn't hear. "She's receiving a formal warning about misuse of emergency services," Officer Jenkins replied. "And we're strongly encouraging her to attend the community relations workshop at the precinct next week." As they talked, Karen could be seen walking quickly toward her house, her yoga pants swishing as she practically ran away from the scene. Her phone was no longer in her hand. Officer Martinez had deleted all the unauthorized recordings of Emma. "Ready for those monkey bars?" Sarah asked Emma, who was watching the other kids play with interest. Yes, Emma reached for Sarah's hand naturally, a gesture that meant more than any words could say. Today had been scary, but it had also shown Emma that her foster mother would protect her, no matter what. As they walked to the monkey bars together, several parents smiled and waved. The park was returning to its usual peaceful state, though this afternoon would be remembered for a long time to come. And somewhere in the distance, Karen Mitchell was about to learn that her actions would have consequences she hadn't anticipated. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the police station with Emma's case file and her foster parent certification. Officer Jenkins had asked her to come in to make an official statement about yesterday's incident. Emma was safely at her new school, where Sarah had made sure the teachers knew about the park incident in case the little girl needed extra support. The police station was busy that morning. As Sarah sat in the waiting area, she noticed Karen Mitchell walking out of one of the offices. Karen looked different today. Gone were the designer workout clothes, replaced by a simple business suit. Her face turned red when she saw Sarah, and she quickly looked away. "Sarah, please come in," Officer Jenkins called from her office door. Inside, Sarah was surprised to see not just Officer Jenkins, but also the police chief and a woman she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thompson," the police chief began, "I'm Chief Anderson. This is Diana Foster from the local news. She's here because several videos of yesterday's incident have gone viral on social media." Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't checked social media since yesterday, focusing instead on making sure Emma felt secure after the scary experience. "Don't worry," Diana said quickly, noticing Sarah's concern. "The videos actually show you handling the situation wonderfully. We'd like to turn this incident into something positive for our community." Officer Jenkins opened her laptop and showed Sarah some of the videos taken by other parents at the park. One showed her calmly protecting Emma while Karen yelled. Another captured the moment when multiple parents stepped forward to defend her character. "These videos have sparked an important conversation about prejudice and foster care in our community," Chief Anderson explained. "We've received dozens of calls from people wanting to know how they can become foster parents." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "That's amazing," she said softly. "There are so many children who need homes." Just then, Ms. Rodriguez arrived, carrying a thick folder. "Sorry I'm late," she said, taking a seat next to Sarah. "I was just getting Emma's latest school report. She spoke up in class today, Sarah." Her teacher was thrilled. This news made Sarah smile through her tears. After just 2 weeks, Emma was already making progress, despite challenges like yesterday's incident. "Mrs. Thompson," Diana leaned forward, "would you be willing to share your story? We want to highlight the importance of foster care and address the prejudices that foster families sometimes face, especially transracial foster families." Before Sarah could answer, Ms. Rodriguez pulled out some papers from her folder. "Actually, I have something relevant to share," she turned to Sarah. "Remember how we couldn't find much information about Emma's background? Well, we finally got her complete file this morning." Everyone in the room listened as Ms. Rodriguez continued. "It turns out that Emma's biological mother was half African American. Her blonde hair and light skin come from her father's side, but she's actually biracial." Sarah sat back, processing this information. She thought about Karen's assumptions and how wrong they had been on every level. "There's more," Ms. Rodriguez said. "Karen Mitchell? She works as a real estate agent, and her company has a strict non-discrimination policy. They've already seen the videos." Chief Anderson nodded. "Yes, her employers contacted us this morning. They're requiring her to take comprehensive diversity training if she wants to keep her job." Diana was taking notes quickly. "This story gets more interesting by the minute. Sarah, what would you say to people who make assumptions about families that don't fit their expectations?" Sarah thought about Emma's smile when she tried the monkey bars yesterday, about her speaking up in class today, about all the progress they'd made in just 2 weeks. "I'd say that family isn't about matching skin colors or features. It's about love, safety, and helping children grow." Officer Jenkins smiled. "Speaking of growth, Karen Mitchell is registered for our community relations workshop next week, and she's not coming alone. Her real estate office is sending their entire staff." "Sometimes," Chief Anderson added, "it takes an incident like this to open people's eyes and create real change." As the meeting continued, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma's teacher. Emma drew a picture of you two at the park. She labeled it My Family. Would you like me to save it for you? Sarah smiled at the message, knowing that despite yesterday's ugliness, something beautiful was growing. And somewhere across town, Karen Mitchell was learning that her actions would lead to changes she never expected, not just in her life, but in the entire community. The local newspaper published the story 3 days after the park incident. Diana Foster's article, titled When Prejudice Meets Pride, a foster care story, appeared on the front page. The response from the community was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah sat at her kitchen table that morning, reading the article while Emma ate breakfast. The little girl was happily munching on pancakes shaped like bunnies, a special recipe Sarah had learned from her own mother. Sarah, look. Emma pointed excitedly at her phone, which was buzzing nonstop. Messages were pouring in from fellow nurses, former foster children she had cared for, and even parents whose children she had treated at the hospital. The doorbell rang, making both of them jump. When Sarah opened the door, she found Mrs. Chen from the park standing there with her son David and a large homemade cake. "We wanted to thank you," Mrs. Chen said warmly. "After your story came out, my sister finally got the courage to apply to be a foster parent. She's been thinking about it for years but was afraid she wouldn't be accepted because English isn't her first language." More visitors arrived throughout the morning. Each brought not just food or flowers, but stories of how Sarah's experience had touched them. Mr. Johnson, the father whose daughter had the broken arm, came with his entire family. His wife worked at the local library and announced they were starting a new section dedicated to books about diverse families. Around lunchtime, Emma's teacher, Miss Peters, stopped by. She carried a folder full of drawings made by Emma's classmates. The children wanted to show their support, she explained. They all drew pictures of different kinds of families. Emma sat on the floor, looking through the drawings with wonder. She picked up one that showed a rainbow of stick figures holding hands. "This is like us," she said softly, showing it to Sarah. The local TV station arrived at 2 p.m. to film a segment about foster care awareness. The reporter was touched to see the house full of community members, all sharing stories and support. "Mrs. Thompson," the reporter asked, "did you expect this kind of response?" Sarah looked around her living room. Mrs. Patel was teaching Emma some words in Hindi. The Chen family was arranging food on the dining table. Mr. Johnson's teenagers were showing Emma how to make friendship bracelets. "No," Sarah answered honestly. "I never expected this. What happened at the park was scary and wrong, but look what came from it. People opening their hearts and homes to children who need them." Just then, Ms. Rodriguez arrived with exciting news. "The foster care office has received 30 new applications in the last 2 days," she announced. "And that's not all. Remember the community relations workshop that Karen has to attend." Everyone listened as Ms. Rodriguez continued. "It was supposed to be a small class of 10 people. Now we have over 50 signed up. The police department had to move it to the community center to fit everyone." Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Can I show them my special drawing?" she asked. Sarah nodded, and Emma ran to get her backpack. The drawing she brought back showed 2 figures, one with dark skin and one with light skin, holding hands under a bright sun. Above them, Emma had written in careful letters, "My family is perfect." The TV reporter wiped tears from her eyes. Even the cameraman had to take a moment to compose himself. "There's one more surprise," Ms. Rodriguez said, pulling out an official-looking document. "Sarah, the judge has reviewed Emma's case. Given the strong bond you've already formed and the positive progress Emma has made, they're asking if you'd consider permanent adoption instead of just foster care." The room fell silent. Sarah looked at Emma, who was showing Mrs. Chen how to make Charlie the bunny dance. "Emma, sweetie," Sarah called softly, "would you like to stay with me forever? To be my daughter for real?" Emma's eyes grew wide. She looked around the room at all the smiling faces, then back at Sarah. Without a word, she ran into Sarah's arms and hugged her tight. The TV cameras captured the moment, but nobody was thinking about that. They were too busy watching love win over prejudice, watching a family become complete. And somewhere across town, as Karen Mitchell prepared for her upcoming workshop, She would see this moment on her evening news and finally understand what real family values looked like. A week after the park incident, Karen Mitchell sat nervously in her real estate office, staring at her computer screen. The video of her confrontation with Sarah and Emma had spread far beyond their local community. Her hands shook as she read through hundreds of comments and negative reviews on her business page. Mrs. Mitchell, her boss, Mr. Roberts, called from his office. "We need to talk." Karen walked in slowly, knowing this conversation wouldn't be pleasant. The large window behind Mr. Roberts showed the busy street where several news vans were still parked. "Our company has lost 3 major housing contracts this week," Mr. Roberts said, removing his glasses. "Clients don't want to work with an agency that's being accused of racial profiling. Do you understand how serious this is?" Karen nodded, her designer blouse feeling uncomfortably tight around her neck. "I've already enrolled in the police department's community relations workshop," she said quickly. "And I'm taking those online diversity courses you suggested." "That's not enough," Mr. Roberts replied firmly. "The video shows you harassing a respected pediatric nurse and frightening a foster child. Our phones haven't stopped ringing with complaints." Just then, Karen's phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged her in a new social media post. It was a photo of Sarah and Emma at the Children's Hospital, where Sarah was receiving an award for her work with foster children. The caption read, "This is the family that Karen Mitchell tried to tear apart. Hashtag to better, hashtag love es love." I made a mistake," Karen whispered, her voice shaking. "I want to make things right." Mr. Roberts handed her a piece of paper. "Here's your chance. The community center is organizing a foster care awareness event next month. They need volunteers to help organize it. Either you participate and show genuine change, or you'll need to find another job." Meanwhile, across town at the police station, Officer Jenkins was reviewing the incident report with her supervisor. "The video has actually helped our community outreach program," she explained. "People are coming forward to report similar incidents of harassment they've witnessed." The supervisor nodded approvingly. "And what about Mrs. Mitchell's real estate listings?" "We're investigating 3 complaints of possible discrimination in her past property showings," Officer Jenkins replied. "Former clients saw the park video and contacted us about their experiences." Back at her office, Karen gathered her courage and picked up her phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed the community center's number. "Hello," she said quietly, "this is Karen Mitchell. I'd like to volunteer for the foster care awareness event." The coordinator's response surprised her. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, Sarah Thompson suggested you might call. She thought you could share your story about learning from mistakes and changing perspectives." Karen nearly dropped her phone. After everything she'd done, Sarah was giving her a chance to redeem herself. That evening, as Karen drove home, she passed the park where everything had happened. She saw several new signs posted near the playground. "All families welcome here, and love makes a family." She pulled over, overwhelmed by emotions. Through her car window, she watched children of all colors playing together. A Muslim woman in a hijab was pushing her child on the swing. 2 dads were teaching their daughter to ride a bike. A grandmother with gray dreadlocks was reading to her grandchildren under a tree. Karen's phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from her daughter in college. "Mom, my friends showed me the video. I'm so embarrassed. This isn't how you raised me. This isn't who you are. Please fix this." Tears rolled down Karen's cheeks as she realized how far-reaching the consequences of her actions were. Her reputation, her career, her relationship with her daughter, everything was affected. She opened her calendar and marked the dates. Community Relations Workshop next week, Foster Care Awareness Event next month. Below these, she wrote a new entry. "Schedule appointment with therapist, understand my biases." As she drove home, Karen passed Sarah's house. Through the window, she could see Sarah and Emma baking cookies together, both wearing matching aprons and laughing. The sight made Karen's heart ache with regret. But tomorrow would be another day, another chance to learn, to grow, to be better. Karen Mitchell, a woman who had tried to tear a family apart, was about to learn her most important life lesson, and the whole community would be watching. 1 month later, the community center was packed for the foster care awareness event. Colorful banners hung from the walls, and information booths lined the large hall. Sarah stood near the entrance, holding Emma's hand, amazed at the turnout. "Look how many people came," Emma exclaimed, pointing at the crowd. She was wearing a new dress that Sarah had bought her to celebrate their upcoming adoption hearing next week. Charlie the bunny, as always, was tucked safely under her arm. Ms. Rodriguez hurried over to them, looking excited. "Sarah, we've already received 50 new foster parent applications today. And guess who's been helping at the registration desk all morning?" They'd all looked over to see Karen Mitchell, wearing a volunteer badge, helping people fill out forms. She looked different now, humbler, quieter, but somehow more genuine. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a Foster Care Alley t-shirt. The past month had changed Karen's life completely. After her story went viral, her daughter had come home from college to help her mother learn and grow. Together, they had attended therapy sessions, diversity training, and community meetings. "Mrs. Thompson." Karen approached them nervously, holding a microphone. "It's time for the speeches. Are you ready?" Sarah nodded and followed Karen to the small stage. The room fell quiet as Karen stepped up to the microphone first. Gone was the entitled woman from the park, replaced by someone who had learned hard but necessary lessons. "A month ago," Karen began, her voice shaking, "I make terrible assumptions about a beautiful family because they didn't look the way I thought they should. I let my prejudice blind me to what really matters in a family: love, care, and commitment." The crowd listened silently as Karen continued. "I've spent the last month learning about foster care, about diverse families, and about my own biases. I've learned that family isn't about matching skin colors. It's about matching hearts." Emma squeezed Sarah's hand as they watched. "She's different now," Emma whispered, showing wisdom beyond her years. Karen turned to Sarah and Emma. "I want to publicly apologize to both of you. My actions that day were inexcusable. But you turned my mistake into a movement that's helping children find homes. You showed me what real strength looks like." When Sarah took the microphone, she smiled at the crowd. "A month ago, I was just a nurse trying to give a scared little girl a home. Today, I see hundreds of people here wanting to do the same thing. Sometimes, the worst moments can lead to the best changes." After the speeches, people gathered around different booths to learn about foster care. Karen's daughter had set up a special booth about combating prejudice in communities. Emma proudly stood with Sarah at their booth, showing visitors her drawing of their family. Mr. Roberts, Karen's boss, approached their booth. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that Karen has been leading our company's new initiative to help foster families find affordable housing. She's completely transformed our office culture." Later that afternoon, as the event was winding down, Karen's daughter brought over a surprise, a cake decorated with the words, "Love makes a family," in rainbow colors. "Emma, would you like to cut the first piece?" Karen asked softly. Emma looked up at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. As they all shared cake, Ms. Rodriguez made an announcement. "Thanks to today's event, we've matched 15 children with potential foster families. And 7 of these families are from diverse backgrounds who said they never thought they could be foster parents until they heard Sarah and Emma's story." Tears formed in Karen's eyes. "I never imagined my biggest mistake would lead to something so beautiful," she said quietly. Sarah watched as Emma showed Karen's daughter how to make Charlie the bunny dance, the same trick she had learned at the community gathering a month ago. "Sometimes," Sarah replied, "we need to see our reflection in others' eyes to really understand ourselves." As the sun set outside the community center, families of all kinds, foster, adoptive, biological, and blended, gathered for a group photo. Karen stood at the edge until Emma ran over and pulled her into the frame. "Everyone belongs," Emma declared firmly, making the whole room smile. The camera flashed, capturing the moment when a community learned that love knows no boundaries. Prejudice can be overcome, and family is what you make it. And in the front row, a little girl with blonde hair stood proudly between her African-American mother and the woman who had learned to see with her heart instead of her eyes.